here are some things that we might find, right, within the genre of apocalyptic. And I put it in this scattershot way because not everything in this constellation of elements is going to be in every apocalyptic. So when we draw the lines of that category, it's not going to be absolute, right? So some of these things will appear and some of them won't. So there's some inconsistency along Daniel, first Ezra, 4 Ezra, 1 Enoch, all of these different books, and Revelation also, and other early Christian apocalypses. But you'll have enough of a gathering of these different elements to say, this looks like an apocalyptic piece of literature. So something like having an angelic guide or an angelic being come and teach you, right? Or show you a vision. That's often a part of an apocalyptic piece of literature. Going to somewhere high up, going to heaven, going onto a mountain to see something. So visions are part of that. Ascent, it's somewhere to see something. An explanation of the heavens, so cosmology is part of that. There's oftentimes a warning or instruction given, that's special knowledge given to the person who's seeing it. So there's also the person who beholds the vision, the seer, who is able to understand the revelation, right? The unveiling of what God's judgment is going to be or what God's plan is going to be at the end time. So eschatology, explanations of the afterlife, maybe explanation of the beginning of the world in a flashback vision. Those are also possibilities. Oftentimes we also find beasts, different monsters haunt apocalypses. So we have beasts that represent different kingdoms or are made of different parts that then are supposed to be allegories for different kings. And then we have crises and disaster. And that, of course, lends itself to the popular term of apocalyptic today. When we think of apocalyptic as disastrous, catastrophic, we have zombie apocalypses, we have apocalyptic movies or post-apocalyptic scenes. So those sorts of things, right? So we have this confluence of different elements showing up in apocalyptic literature. So let me give you some comparisons just so we have some on-the-ground examples. So an ancient comparison, I'm not going to read through all of these. I'm just going to highlight some of the phrases you'll find and they're underlined. So in Ezekiel, this is the earliest excerpt that I'm presenting you with today from the 6th century BCE, in which you have in chapter 40, Ezekiel has the hand of the Lord upon him. And what happens? So we have a heavenly being, the Lord, taking Ezekiel and showing him visions. He goes to a very high mountain. There's a man there. This is going to sound very familiar if you've read through Revelation already, right? A man there with the appearance like bronze. This is like the man that appears before John of Patmos in Revelation chapter 1, right? Something else very familiar to Revelation happens when he's holding a measuring reed. And this is what's going to measure the temple in the vision that Ezekiel has, right? Very similar to the angel in Revelation 21 of the New Jerusalem, the measuring of the walls of the New Jerusalem. So that's one interesting thing about Revelation is that it borrows a lot. It borrows a lot of Ezekiel, as you see right here, just in this one paragraph, several elements that show up again. Similarly, we have borrowing from Daniel, another ancient writing that's categorized in a few chapters as apocalyptic. So Daniel chapter 7, this is written 2nd century BCE. So this is Daniel having dreams and visions. And what does he see in them? He sees 4 great beasts coming out of the sea. And this should sound very familiar to you, having read Revelation, the beast from the sea coming out, and again, having 10 horns, which then can be allegorized as representing 10 kings, and then one final horn with human eyes and a mouth speaking arrogantly. We should understand this as Antiochus Epiphanes, from the 2nd century, right before the Jewish revolt, right before the Maccabean revolt. So this is before the time of Jesus, before the Jesus movement. But these elements of the beasts, of the 10 horns, and all of these things are then borrowed right into Revelation, right? We see what's interesting about Revelation, it doesn't quote directly. So when you see Paul writing or the letter of the Hebrews, there's direct quotation. It'll say something like, as it says in scripture, right? Or as the prophet says. And you see that in the Gospels also. They at least are citing their sources, right? They're telling you this is from Hebrew Bible. This is from scripture. Revelation never bothers to do that. It's never a direct quotation and there's no reference to the scripture in that way. It's simply just incorporates, right? So this is, if you wanted to call this plagiarism, right, in a modern day sensibility, it would be, but it does this using these ancient works. Another comparison that you can find, this is now drawn from the New Testament. This is what's called sometimes a mini apocalypse, the Olivet Discourse from Mark chapter 13. And here again, we see certain elements that we might say are hinting at an apocalyptic scenario. The whole text is not apocalyptic. We now would categorize it as gospel, which is also a strange genre in itself. But here we have being in a high place. Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives along with his disciples. He then becomes the guide, and he then tells them what's going to happen, right? It's a predictive element to that. He says, you'll hear wars and rumors of wars. There are going to be earthquakes. There are going to be famines. And then you will see, right? It'll be revealed to you the desolating sacrilege. And there's a warning. There's an instruction to flee to the mountains. This is something drawn from New Testament that also has echoes of apocalyptic literature. So once you train your eye to be on the lookout, you can read certain ancient texts and say, this shares or overlaps or has enough of these elements to be called apocalyptic literature, or at least be influenced or be borrowing from, or to be a precursor to this particular modern genre that we've come up with. Here's a funny one. This is not from a Jewish or Christian perspective, but from Greco-Roman side of things, which we might call pagan. So this is Lucian of Samosata, writing in the 2nd century CE, and he talks about this guy, Menippus, who, like Icarus in Greek myth, puts on wings and he flies into heaven, right? So he's flying to heaven. And so we have an ascent, right? If we want to say, okay, let's read this apocalyptic, he flies into heaven, past the stars, past the sun, then he goes to heaven. He knocks on the door of heaven. Hermes comes and answers the door, and he goes and he sees Zeus. And then he asks Zeus to show him around heaven. So he has an angelic guide that gives him a heavenly vision and shows him how things happen. And Zeus takes him to the place where he listens to prayers, right? So he like has these different funnels and he uncovers them and puts his ear to the funnel and he listens to prayers. There's a golden throne, and then the prayers are saying things like, "Oh Zeus, may I succeed in becoming king," or "Oh Zeus, make my onions and my garlic grow," or "Ye gods, let my father die quickly," right? These are terrible prayers, or some of them are in the list that he gives. But if you know apocalyptic, or you know this kind of otherworldly literature, then if you know that kind of literature, you know this is actually a parody. Lucian is making fun of philosophers. He's making fun of people who believe these things. He's making fun of superstition, right? So to understand that that is also a possibility in this particular ancient context of riffing and making fun of a particular type of writing.